I can't even hear. Oh, it's better.
Okay, it's now 8:30. Welcome to the final Puna Kōrero meeting, this 19th day of, well, it's not the 19th of November, is it? It's actually the 10th of December. So I was looking at my notes. So before we actually get into the agenda, I just want to remind councillors that this is a live stream meeting, and can you please use your microphones when speaking and turn them off when you're finished. It's a habit we'll get into as time goes by, I'm sure. And when staff have to come and talk about their papers, can you please come over here and use your microphones as well? As we can see, well, as councillors can see, and those that are here, Councillor Ford is Zooming, and you need to have your camera and microphone on, which obviously you have. Very good. Let's now start the meeting with apologies. We have an apology from Councillor Trillin, and that is all. The rest of us are here, and welcome to Taku as well. Thank you, Taku, for coming along. I'll move that the apology be received. Do I have a seconder? Yes, Councillor Seuli. All those in favour? Those against? Carried. We have no requests to speak in the public forum area, so we will now move on to conflict of interest declarations. Does anyone have a conflict of interest they wish to declare? Being no, I'll take it. We'll move on to items of extraordinary business, of which there are none, and that means that we can move on to the unconfirmed minutes of the Puna Kōrero meeting of the 19th of November. I'll move those to get them on the table. Do I have a seconder? Mike, are there any comments or corrections to those minutes? There being none, I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Right.
Against? Carried. So that brings us to the first item on the agenda, which is deliberations for the proposed changes to the rating policy. I'll take the paper as read, but Zach, if you can just briefly highlight the key issues here so that councillors are familiar with those again.
Through you, Chair. So the rating policy leads to speed up the differential change. So in the 2018 long-term plan, there was a 6-year differential change. The current proposal leads to move the differential into year 1 of the 2021 long-term plan and lock it in for the first 3 years of the 2021 long-term plan cycle. The idea behind it is it will reach the intended outcomes set out in 2018, provide parity within the business community, and reach the desired objectives of an equitable rating system. Thank you.
Do councillors have any questions? You'll see here that this is, as we've said before when people came to see us, this is moving up a decision that was already made for these for this rating issue. It was not to relitigate whether we should do it or not, because that decision was made 3 years ago. So I have a question, Zach. So what would the impact on rates be if we did not do this and let it go to our original decision over 6 years?
Through you, Chair. So with the rating differential, it doesn't actually change the total amounts of rates taken. It affects the proportionate share. So what it would result in would be that the shopping plazas in rural categories would have a slightly lower rate increase for the years 1 and 2, and the residential and general business community would have slightly more. So it's the parity between the rating categories as opposed to a change in the total rate take. So it's the split of rates.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, Zach, on page 27, the targeted rate, it's got a footnote alongside the heading, and the footnote says that we don't accept lump sum payments, but we actually do, don't we? Each quarter accept the lump sum payment.
My apologies, I'm just trying to get the reference itself.
Is that page 27 of page 5? Under what heading? Yeah.
Got that there.
Yeah.
So, through you, Chair, within the rating policy itself, some councils have a approach of lump sum upfront payments. This doesn't actually speak to the payment option, so we do provide for upfront payments of the whole year's rates. Other rating policies actually have specific conditions around lump sum upfront payment would provide a offset to the total amount. So it doesn't actually speak to the mechanism of paying, it's actually just that we don't provide a offset for an upfront lump sum payment, if that's clear.
Sure.
On page 29, the city development rate, the first line at the top of the page, and I suppose that's page 7, I suppose, of this attachment. The first line says, the city development rate includes village planning. Haven't we canned village planning for some time, for the foreseeable future?
I think that decision has not been made. It's in abeyance at the moment, Mike. So we have not made that decision and won't until we go into deliberations around the long-term plan, right? So I assume it's factually correct at the moment. Yep. All right. Are there any other comments or questions from councillors? Yes, Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This actually goes back to point 1 in the document regarding the requirement to undertake a review. Can I request some commentary from officers regarding the number of submissions received in this review compared to previous rounds, and if this would be a lower than expected amount, is that something that, in terms of the quality of the feedback from the community, you would consider satisfactory?
Through you, Chair. So if we take a comparison to the previous one, which was undertaken in 2018 long-term plan, the engagement with the rural community was rather similar. So similar size at the actual public meetings themselves, and on a submission level slightly down. Across the board, it was actually a very similar submission percentage compared to what it was 3 years ago. In terms of engagement, it is a subject that is highly discussed. It was engaged at a public meeting forum, but the submissions ultimately came from that. So it is in line with what was in 2018. We would believe it was an engaged community, but that kind of speaks to what's within the policy document or the report itself.
You have another question, Councillor Hayward? No. Any other questions? Before we vote on it, I need a seconder. Which? Oh, you want to make a comment? Well, I'll get Mike to second it first, thank you. Right, then we can vote on it. Yes, Mayor Baker.
Thank you. I just want to say I'm actually not supporting this. I think this is the 3rd time in a row we have picked on our rural community early. We've heard consultation from them, and I'm not sure why we keep going back at them. From my point of view, I would have taken the motels on with the full occupancy with MSD renting all these places out. They're the ones that are raking the money in our city at the moment. So I won't be supporting it. I do support, however, the stormwater wastewater pipe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. I was going to say that'll probably start a couple of other comments. Councillor Waddle.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, 21 submitters of a population of nearly 60,000 in the city, but 43% of the submissions were in favour of option 1. Why have we gone with 5% of the submitters' requests?
My answer to that is that it's a democracy. We're not ruling by necessarily what people say. We listen to them, and we have done, and that we have the recommendation that is there now. And Councillor Mayor Baker has spoken against it. Yeah. Are there any other? I'll remind you again that what we're doing is moving this forward. This was a decision made in 2018, and so we are hastening these changes. That is exactly what we're doing. Yes, Councillor Waller.
Just supplementary to that, then we want engagement from people, and we've got a clear outcome of only 21 people. So it's not a large proportion of the city's population or the rate-paying base, but we're sort of going against what the numbers show in this report. That's just my comment on it. We want engagement, and the people that do engage are not going to feel that they've been listened to.
Yep, that's a fair comment, but I remind you again that this is not council by referenda. We go out for consultation. We listen to people. The reason why this policy came in the first place in 2018 is because we listened to people. My recollection is correct. So that's why we pushed it out over 6 years. We've subsequently found that there are some issues in doing that, and that's why we moved to bring it forward to hasten that change. So we do listen to people, and this is a council that has done that. But just because there is a certain weight of submissions does not necessarily mean that council will go with those. Councillor Morrell.
I wasn't here in 2018, but I tend to concur with the mayor. The difficulty of course, at the moment is the rural community is getting hammered, not only by this, but by the condition of their roads, by the transmission gully, roading, the trucks and all the things that are happening, the quarry. It really is, they really are getting a lambasting at the moment. So it's just one of those things. But I guess I understand what the original intention was, and they agreed to that, and we're bringing it forward. So it sort of is another slap in the face for them as well. And I concur. But I mean, if we vote against it, then the options are it just goes back to in the time period that it was before.
That's a good question. And Zach, if council were to, and I assume you're only talking about rural differential, if we were to, and reminding people that the differential has already shifted, right? It's been in its first year of shifting. First or second? Third, yeah. So that differential has already shifted. So if we were to freeze that, as it is at the moment, what would that mean? Zach, are you able to answer that?
So how the differential works is it splits it within categories. So we kind of sector our rates. So within the business community, what that would mean is the shopping plazas would get a respectively lower rate increase, and the business or normal business community, small businesses, would have a higher rate increase because the business community is considered insular and it balances out. If we were to hold it at the current rate increase for the current year, rural would have a slightly lower rate increase proportionally, and the actual residential ratepayer would actually end up bearing more of it. So it's effectively drawing the line in the sand. So it's that split between the different rating categories. So the total share is, so we look at a 4.98% increase with the current proposal of the acceleration. The rural community sits about of an average, I think, of 11%. If we were to hold it at the current differential, that falls down to roughly 8% because it is still a changing differential. If that makes sense.
Okay. I understand, Councillor Ford, you have a
Yep.
question?
Yep. I just wanted some clarification around the mayor's comments. Were you saying, through the chair, were you saying then that you would be in favour of option 3, which is not to have that targeted rate brought forward, but have the targeted rate on the funding of the repairs for the stormwater? Is that right? Okay. Yeah, I would support what the mayor has said, but also would like to know around the motels, is it too late to do any work around that, targeting the motels?
Fair question, Zach.
It's something that we could, sorry, through you, Chair. It's something that we could undertake. It would still need another special consultation period because it is a change from the current rating proposal, which we could do as part of the wider LTP consultation in early 2021. But it is an adjustment that we could make without actually going out to consultation.
Okay. I'm not clear about what you are actually suggesting, Mayor Baker, in terms of you're just saying you're going to vote against this. If we were to move, are you wanting then that the rural rate be frozen as it is now? That's what you would prefer? Or would you, what do you want to happen?
I was just voting against it and voting for option 3. I wasn't pushing us to go out again because the cost of consultation is not worth the cost of what we're doing. So it was purely a point of view.
Okay, you want to make a comment, Zach?
Through you, Chair. So with the current options that are on the table, option 3, the recommended option, is acceleration of the differential. If we were to move away from that, option 1 is the current stage differential changes. So it doesn't, yeah. So if you were to move away from option 3 or option 4, what I would suggest is adopting option 1, which is holding the current differential, and also option 3, which is the separate stormwater and private wastewater repairs. So the combination of the two would be the outcome as opposed to option 4.
Just a clarification there, that would mean that we go back to our original 6-year staged increase. It's not an increase, it's going back, reverting to the 6-year increase.
Status quo effectively, yes.
Yeah. Councillor Morrell.
Just a clarification around the motels, because now that one of the major motels is no longer a motel, it's a residential emergency housing situation, what is it classified in terms of rates? Is it a motel or is it, does it change it become a residential rate?
Through you, Chair.
Zach.
So I can't specifically talk to how it is classified, but how our classification work is within the policy. It's a process of elimination when you work through the categories. So anything that would be designated as motel is typically short stay, tourism generating, all the criteria is laid down there. At the point it becomes long stay accommodation, residential accommodation, it would actually trigger and potentially defer to a residential accommodation. So the funding and impact statement clearly lays out the criteria for which we regularly revisit what the classification of each property within the city is.
Yeah, I'll allow.
Can I have a follow up to that then? Because this is it's not about, I'm talking about the one in Grays Road, which is now emergency housing for a period of up to 3 or 4 months. So that is really residential. It's bringing people to the city, but it's not, it's not a business. Well, it is a business in a way, but it's no longer a motel.
Yeah, good point, but I don't think we can answer that other than what you've done already, Zach, and it's something that we are going to have to look at into the future, because you make a valid point, Councillor Morrell. Yeah. Councillor Weehapi.
Thank you. Just for clarification, so speeding up the differential change in year 1, so for option 4, won't affect obviously residential, but it will in the following. So
That will affect residential.
Through you, Chair.
Yep.
So through accelerating the differential into year one, we need to separate rate increases versus differentials. So the rate increases which are proposed will still happen, and that will be the average increase of all ratepayers across the city. With the differential change, if we move to the acceleration in year one, the differentials are locked in for the first 3 years of the long-term plan. So everything remaining for years 2 and 3 will remain constant. So there's no further movement. With option 1, which is the status quo, there will be changes within the share because of the change in the differential over the first 3 years.
So supplementary. So then the residential will be higher than that of the rural.
Through you, Chair.
Yep.
With option 1, if we stay with the current differential changes, the residential sector takes more of the share in years 1 and 2 until we reach parity in year 3 of the long-term plan. So the acceleration reaches parity in year 1, and there's no significant change from there.
Okay, so given that the Eastern Ward or parts of the Eastern Ward, the difference went over the huge valuations, I'll be supporting option 4.
Okay. Can Mayor Baker? You wanted to make a comment?
No, my comment was about the social, the housing we have with our Post Hotel, Amethyst, all of those ones then. Now they are being used for long-term social housing. Does that change their rating?
True.
Through you, Chair.
Yep.
So if you refer, so I can provide context, if you refer to page of the report.
Through the Chair, can we come back on that, because it does change some of the policy settings, and to do a bit of more research and come back to council?
So does that mean that we need to withdraw this paper at this stage? And that would then have to go, does that upset timing? Can it come back to council next week, or then we have to delay it until next year?
I would recommend that we look at the motels separately in line with the current policy settings.
Okay.
Because it's actually the term, so do we change something for a 3-month period versus something that's, if it was social housing for a year, that's quite a different to what the contract terms are, and come back on that basis.
Okay. Sorry. Well, hold on. I'm good. Taku first.
Just a point of clarification, on what category, and I know it's been sort of a long drawn-out process, does Hongaweka community sit in? Is that rural?
Through you, Chair. There is a specific Hongaweka community provided within the policy at its own rating differential, which is actually at 0.7, so it has its own rating category. So for the purposes of discussion, it hasn't been brought up because there is no change currently provided for them. So it's 0.7 with any of the options provided.
Yeah. Councillor Duncan, you were...
Yeah, look, I want to come back to the whole point of this in the first place, and that was equity and fairness. And it made a whole lot of sense to me. And I sat in on all 3 of the consultations that we had. And it just made good sense. And I think we need to sort of go ahead with the vote on this.
Yeah, I think we have had a fair airing of everything. So what we are voting on is option 4, which is the recommendation. So we do have a seconder, don't we? Yeah, I have a seconder for this. Yeah, thank you, Mike. Councillor Duncan. So I am now going to put this to the vote, and which is option 4, which is an acceleration starting next year, correct? So all those in favour say aye. Those against? No. So do you want your votes recorded? So that's Mayor Baker, Councillor Waddle and Councillor Morrell.
And Councillor Ford.
And Councillor Ford? You voted aye. So on that basis, I declare the motion carried. Thank you, everybody. We'll now move to item 6.2, and thank you, Zach. To item 6.2, which is climate change strategy. This is a summary of the submissions and adoption of the final strategy. I assume everyone's read the paper. Hayden, you're going to... I'm going to move it to put it on the table. And a seconder. Can I have a seconder? Yes, Councillor Hayward. Thank you. Right. Do you want to just... we have read it. We're taking it as read. Are there any key points that you want to make about this?
No, Councillor. I'll take that as read. If there's any questions,
Okay.
happy to field them.
So do we have any questions on this? Yes, Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Points 27 and 30. The recommendation in 27 is that the specific actions would be not included in the climate change strategy, but that there would be some decision with what council would do at a later date. Is it the expectation of officers to consider this as part of a long-term plan or some other mechanism?
So I'll just highlight quickly what the impacts on Indigenous biodiversity may be. We think that there'll be an increase in the distribution of pest species. More pest species may arrive. Habitat of species will change. Things may dry out. Things may get wetter. There are councils around the country that have addressed this through Indigenous biodiversity strategies. The National Policy Statement on Indigenous Biodiversity is expected to be adopted by central government in April. That directs regional councils to make a regional Indigenous biodiversity strategy. We have discussed the idea internally with ourselves and parks departments and other departments within council, but I recommend that we wait until the Indigenous Biodiversity National Policy Statement is adopted or is not adopted by council before moving on that.
Is that... You have another question, Councillor Hayward?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The follow-up question, therefore, is does that put us as a council at risk that we are not showing leadership on this issue? We could choose in the long-term plan to take measures that would, in of themselves, help in the broad principle of improving Indigenous biodiversity, particularly, as you noted, which I think is exactly where I was coming from, around the potential significant increase in pest species around Porirua City.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So, despite not having an Indigenous biodiversity strategy, we have actually done quite a bit to protect Indigenous biodiversity. So the district plan has identified over 3,000 significant natural areas. Those are now protected. We also contribute to Greater Wellington Regional Council's Key Native Ecosystems work program, which does pest control within those significant natural areas. The parks team do quite a bit of work, and of course the harbour team are doing quite a large riparian planting program at the moment. So while we don't have an Indigenous biodiversity strategy, we are making some pretty good moves in that area.
No. Yes, Mayor Baker.
It's more of a comment than anything else. I support the paper completely, but I do think this is being put onto us by government. Obviously, with climate change is a happening thing. You can just see from the rain outside today with the problems we have with our pipes not coping. But we have to get on top of our carbon, electric cars and everything else. Obviously, our budgets going forward are going to need to be increased, which is something that will obviously come out in the long-term plan. But I'm wondering how we can get some help from government, like every council, for our pipes and climate change, because this is now becoming our main issue, and you can see that throughout our city. So I am calling on government for more funds for this.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. Councillor Morrell.
This whole thing makes me extremely nervous. I'm not against it at all, but I have got some huge concerns, and following on from the Mayor, about costs. And and I just can't find it. I wrote it down. In one of the pages, it talks about climate change in the islands, and that we will have to prepare ourselves for a lot more immigrants. I mean, this is sort of getting. We've got to bring this back to really our ratepayers. I mean, the expectation now of our, we just got to be careful that we don't build an expectation within our community. The council, I mean, we're getting demands by a couple of people that after Early Road that we raise the height of the houses like they did up in Waikanai, and regional council paid for those houses to be lifted and all sorts of things. So I just think this is a very emotive area, and we do have to be very, very conscious of the ratepayers and what it costs. I mean, this is not going to go away, and acknowledge that. And if it's not going to, it's going to get worse. I mean, we've got, we've got properties by the seaside all around our community. So we've just got to be a little bit careful, I think, in the way that we do this, and we don't build up an expectation, and all of the costs go on the ratepayer. This is a national problem, and frankly, councils can't afford to do it. What's required. So I'm just nervous about this whole thing, but I'm happy to support it. But I think we need to make sure the context of it is that we've got to bear in mind the ultimate is that the ratepayers and the cost to the ratepayers has got to be a big concern.
Yeah. Thank you for those comments. I guess you could say whatever happens, the ratepayer's going to pay one way or another. But anyway, Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, it's more or less a follow-on from what the Mayor and Councillor Morell spoken about. On page 37, we've got the cost at $890,000, of which $600,000 will be for $600,000 for expert staff. Has any investigation been made of doing this on a regional basis? I mean, we all face the same problems, and I wonder if a pool of talent from the whole region, rather than just us funding it, would be a better idea.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So the Wellington Regional Growth Framework does have climate change on its radar. They've indicated that there'll be 2 projects, one of which will be around adaptation at a regional scale, and that may provide us with some guidance. At the end of the day, we still have to make decisions for our ratepayers, and so the decision making should be local. Where the costs come from is up for debate, and we should absolutely expect central government to come to that party. Have I answered your question? Is that, yeah?
Yep. Councillor Sauli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question. I think what Councillor Morell was referring to was probably page 33, but my question is regarding to point 15. It talks about that there was a meeting, discussions held with Porirua residents from the islands of Tuvalu, Kiribati, Niue and Samoa, Tonga. Question is, how many were at that meeting? Because it looks like it was a formal public service network meeting.
So there was a series of meetings that I had with residents from all those islands, and I went to the Pacific Services Network meeting as well. At that particular meeting, there were probably 15 or 20 odd people.
And just and those other meetings that you had, how many people had attended those previous meetings?
So with the Kiribati, I had 4 or 5 people. Tuvalu was 2. Samoa, I believe, was just 1. And Tonga was 1.
Yeah, so my concern is that when we're getting kind of feedback, kind of makes it like we made connections with a big group when in actual fact it was minimal.
Sure.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Oh, yes, sorry. Carry on. Councillor Ford.
Yeah, just around that Pacific migration, which I think Councillor Morell was alluding to, that is going to be a side effect of climate change, whether we like it or not. So we need to be prepared in terms of accepting those people coming in, unless you're proposing that they stay in boats or something. We will end up having those people come from the likes of Tuvalu and Kiribati, who are slowly going underwater. My concern is around, Councillor Fafoi Sayuli raised it as well, around that engagement. We saw with, what are they called now, Kāinga Order, and they did a lot of engagement as well with Pacific people, and I think the mayor went along to one where it was a hall full of people that were there with the churches. Why wasn't that avenue? So we've got someone who's on council who works in the Pacific, who's our Pacific liaison person. Why didn't we get those sort of engagements or consultation meetings organised?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The short answer to that is time constraints and capacity constraints. Churches were raised to me as a very good avenue to reach those communities, and also one thing that was made very clear is that we need to be making key messages available in Pacific languages. So I accept that the engagement can be better, and part of the work program going forward, should the strategy be adopted, is that we do that engagement not just in a piecemeal basis, but ongoing.
Sorry, just another comment, because it does kind of feel like a tick box exercise, and climate change isn't something new to the Pacific. They do know about it. Their leaders are talking about it. So it would make sense for you to go to those churches who can then translate those messages effectively to them. My other question was around Ngāti Toa notes that the resources will be required to develop specific positions on climate change. Where does the funding for that? Who's going to be funding that resource? Council, or do we go to central government as well too?
Through you, Mr. Chair. It's a very good question. I would say that to be determined. We do have some operational budget that we have included in this, in the long-term plan bid. If that gets approved, then we will have some budget to be able to engage with Ngāti Toa. The total cost for the adaptation work program is a little bit hard to determine, because it's a little bit how long's a piece of string. If you look at Hawke's Bay, they went through an 8-year adaptation process where they've engaged with their communities and tried to come up with plans to adapt to sea level rise. Now, I think 8 years is possibly too long. I don't think anyone really wants to go through an 8-year process. So part of what we want to do here is get the staff on board, get the adaptation planning underway, and map out a clear process, how we engage with Ngāti Toa, how we engage with our Pacific communities, how we engage with the rest of our community, and how we set some clear guidelines around what the council will pay for, what we expect central government to pay for, and go from there.
Okay.
All right. Yes, Councillor Morrell.
I want to clarify the immigrants. I'm not against that at all. Don't get me wrong. But I just read the comment. As part of the long-term planning, we need to plan for and accommodate communities displaced by climate change. That infers that it is a council's responsibility, and it isn't a council responsibility. It's not a ratepayer's responsibility. If that happens, it's a government responsibility. If they, we shouldn't. And so I'm not. It's just that this report is fluffy. And it talks about an ideal situation, but again, it comes back to the impact to our community in terms of the ratepayers.
Yep, fair point. Councillor Morrell, no doubt that officers will take that into consideration as we move on the strategy going forward. Are there any other comments? Yes. Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, just one thing that intrigued me on page 82 of the minutes, 19 of our document on the strategy. The first bullet point says we have to identify the risks and the opportunities. I know a lot of the risks. I haven't yet thought of an opportunity in climate change. Can you give us an idea of what those?
So, with climate change, there'll be new industries arising. We should be making space for those industries to work in Porirua, to come to Porirua. Even now, there's a whole new consultancies opening up. I mean, it will become an industry. So like the health and safety industry, you know, there's now auditing agencies that do climate audit mitigation audits, adaptation planning, carbon banking. So there's quite a few industries arising out of this.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions? Well, I'm going to just have a couple of nitpicks. Sorry. And while I fully support this motion, I'd just like to ask you, page 41, the conclusion, you say there, by recommending that Council adopt the strategy, we are taking the first concrete steps in preparing our community, etc., etc. Have we not already started taking concrete steps? Was Jim Darm's going out to the community not a first step in doing this? I think it denigrates what the previous council has done or put into motion. And I guess my first question is then, is Jim Darm or similar going to be involved in continuing his discussions around with our coastal communities? Very valuable discussions, I might add.
Yes, I note your point, Councillor. That's a fair point, and certainly we will need expertise involved. Jim Darm makes sense, but I don't want to, preempt any
No.
sort of purchasing process. But absolutely.
Okay. And my second question is not the district plan putting us in a proactive position in terms of the things that are already in the district plan?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Can I then move on to page 80, which is, where am I? This page. So this, I just want to ask the question about electric vehicles. When you talk about all new Porirua City Council vehicle purchases or leases to be low emissions vehicles, and then you say where possible. What does that mean?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. There's not really at the moment any sort of four-wheel drive ute vehicles available that are electric. So for our parks rangers and transport people that need that sort of vehicle, it's unlikely that we can get them an EV at this stage. I understand Great Wall makes an electric ute, but the range isn't that good. So what we've got here is a compromise, sort of indicating the intention to move to a low emissions fleet, but recognising that it's just not practical in a short term.
No, I understand that, but does that mean that we are changing our vehicle policy, our vehicle purchasing policy, so that all new vehicles will be electric or hybrid? And what are the cost implications of that, and are they taken into account in the $890,000?
So
is there a cost benefit analysis going to be done on that in terms of the benefit of having an electric vehicle over, or a hybrid vehicle for that matter, over a normal vehicle that we would purchase? Because if so, there are cost implications, and what we're saying here, what we're approving, is a new vehicle policy, which means that we'll throw cost benefit out the window, and climate change or mitigating climate change will be the number one criteria for the highest weighting.
So I don't really see any change to our cost benefit analysis happening, other than that you might look at a rather long term rather than the short term cost benefit. So not just looking at the depreciation of the vehicle, but looking at the operating cost of the vehicle as well, because electric vehicles will have a much lower lifetime operational cost. I will point out that this is likely to be foisted on us in the short term future, whether we go for it or not.
Right, but we should if that's the case, and I'm not saying that it's not, we should acknowledge those costs in this policy at some stage. I guess that they'll get highlighted going forward in terms of, because cost benefit analysis is fine, and I recognise the lower running costs of an electric vehicle, whether the life cycle costs are lower or not, I'm not sure, but we do need to just acknowledge this. I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing it, but we need to acknowledge it.
But for the sake of clarity, Mr Chair, we haven't changed our policy at the moment. So when we purchase a vehicle, whether it's just a standard vehicle for a building inspector or if it's a truck or something like that, we go through a whole of life costing exercise. We look at different models. We're tapped into the government's purchasing scheme, so we get large discounts, and then we have officers saying, well, we'd like this vehicle, but actually if it's cheaper to buy another vehicle, that's what we buy. And you'll be familiar too that the government announced, I think last week or the week before, that all government departments will move to electric vehicles or something similar within 5 years, and that's school boards and hospitals, but interestingly local government wasn't there. So again, at the moment, there's an intention, the minute it becomes cheaper, or the Prime Minister announces a wonderful subsidy on electric vehicles, they're $20,000 cheaper per vehicle or something, that would affect the calculations. But at the moment, the way it works is we go for the cheapest model that fits our purpose.
Right, so we're not saying that all new vehicles will be electric or hybrid. We haven't changed our policy.
No, we have not changed our policy, but the way, as Hayden says, the world is moving in a certain direction.
Look, I understand
and the way technology moves, you'd expect that in the short-term future, at some stage, an electric vehicle will be cheaper, and that might start with more cars than trucks.
Yeah, look, I accept all that. I just wondered what this meant in terms of what happens practically, because I'll continue with my nitpicking when I just ask you, what does it mean when we're going to investigate options to accelerate vehicle replacement program? Does that mean that we'll be taking existing second-hand, vehicles that we've got out of the fleet that are not due for replacement and replace them with an electric or similar vehicle? Is that what that means?
All it means is that we're going to look at it. Okay. So I'll point to the case in Hutt City. So what Hutt City have done, or are doing rather, is, was it Greater Wellington? Apologies, Greater Wellington Regional Council, are using carbon banking on their regional parks to pay for changes to their vehicle fleet. So
right.
It's an idea that we've taken from them. It is only investigate at this stage, and the caveats being that the vehicles must be fit for purpose. We're still going to go for the cheapest lifetime vehicle, so that's the intention.
Okay, look, sorry, don't mean to nitpick too much, but without further ado, I could ask a few other questions, but I support the policy. I'm now going to put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Those against? Carried. So that moves us to item 6.3, which I will move to put on the table. Do I have a seconder, please? Yes, Councillor Hayward. This is the appointment of an alternate member to the Wellington Regional Climate Change Working Group. I'll take it as read, the paper. I don't think, unless anyone has any comments to make, I'm taking it. Oh, Councillor Morrell, yep.
I support it, don't get me wrong, but I have to make the point that this regional committee, I'd like at some stage someone to give us some feedback on the sort of members on it. I wouldn't like to think that they're all one way and one way inclined, and that's green, and we get imposed on us things that we don't want to happen. So, but Nathan's, I support him. I mean, so I just made that comment. The feed of all of the committee, I'd like back on what sort of makeup it is.
I'm sure our members will take that into consideration. Jeff, you want to make?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I seconded the motion because I want to support Councillor Waddle. I think that considering that the impacts of climate change will far exceed the lifetime of perhaps mine and certainly Councillor Morrell, that we do need to have somebody who is going to be able to have some sense alongside Councillor Trillin about the impacts of something that is coming no matter what we do around this council table, and our duty to show leadership in responding to it. That said, I think that, again, climate change has no regard for partisanship. It has no regard for the politics of the individuals who are around that panel. It is coming, and I strongly support Councillor Waddle because I believe that he will be able to bat a ton.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. The only comment I have to make is that you need to be careful about your ageist comments if you're going to comment on those other things.
I sincerely apologise for offence caused.
Hey, I took no offence to that at all.
Didn't think you would. Sorry, do I have somebody else wanting to make a comment? Surely not. Okay, all right. I'm now going to put the motion. All those in favour? Oh, sorry, Councillor.
No, I was just going to say that if Councillor Waddle couldn't make it, that I'm sure Ewan would step right in, but I'm in support of Nathan.
Sorry, I'm going to put the motion again. All those
I'll
in
be
favour?
first in the queue.
Aye. Those against? Carried. Right, that now moves us to item 6.4, which is investment and liability management policy. I'm going to take it that this paper is read. It's pretty clear under the recommendations what we are approving. Do you want to make any further comments, Zach, on this paper? It's pretty self-evident. Do councillors want to ask any questions or make any comments? I have just one question. Sorry. Oh, a seconder. Yes, Councillor Baker. Forget the seconders. Oh, sorry, Mayor Baker. Sorry, Mayor Baker. Under 6.4, I just asked the question, Zach, about the 280%, the adjusting the borrowing limit ratio. How does that put us compared with similar sized councils?
Through you, Chair. So that update reflects what standard LGFA conditions are. We had a self-imposed lower limit. We're just extending it, potentially looking at our future capital works program. So it's in line with other industry standards.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So that being said, and with what we're being asked to support being clear, I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Carried. So that moves us to item 6.5, which is the finance report for October, up until October. I'm going to take this as read, but I just ask Graham Grieve to just make some... Sorry? Oh, sorry, yeah, a seconder again. I've moved it. A seconder, Councillor Morell. Graham, do you want to make any comments on the key points of these results?
Yeah, through you, Chair. I'll just highlight quickly the important items. One is that Council's year-to-date result is just slightly worse than budget, but that includes the repayment of the wage subsidies to the government of a net $2.4 million. So that's in paras 3 and 4. Just regarding the forecast, which I've highlighted in paras 6 and 7, is around the way Wellington Water have done their forecast, and that they've included $956,000 of additional expenditure for the water reform, but that revenue has not yet been recognised in the forecast. So in terms of para 10, if you exclude the wage subsidy and the Wellington Water water reform additional expenditure, we would be about $1 million better than the budget performance for the full year. Excuse me. In para 11, I've gone through the sort of items of where there's been major movement, and that's around interest on debt, depreciation, some explanations around the roading activity because of additional depreciation and the subsidies impacts. The parking activity in terms of their forecast that's on D at the bottom of page 126, to do with the COVID on the parking fines for expired warrants and registrations. Para E on page 127 is around the landfill. The landfill is doing quite well in terms of year-to-date for additional revenue, but there is the cost of the carbon credits, and I've highlighted that in para 1 and 2, is that the government's moved from $25 to $35 a unit. So that's going to cost council an extra $600,000 a year. The joint venture committee in November approved the increase in the landfill prices to take account of the additional cost for the ETS. So that will be recovered going forward. And the last point was around F, was around the property budget or the forecast for additional costs, repairs and maintenance and things like that. what we do need is, prove, it's one of the recommendation is to bring forward, it's as para 15, $500,000 for this landfill capital budget from next year into this year, so they can get on and do the monitoring for the resource consent requirements.
Okay, thank you, Graham.
Yep.
We have a question from Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. We were talking about item 11 there, other major variances. We've got deprecation, I guess that's depreciation.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
But it says if the link road's open before March 2021, they will have 3 months depreciation. But will they, though? Because they won't be in use till all of Transmission Gully comes into operation, will they? I mean, it's just like it's still sitting on the shelf waiting to be used. Why would we depreciate?
Graham?
Through you, Chair, you're correct. I'm just putting it in there that if they were to open before that, that was all. So at the moment, we're not anticipating that. Yeah.
Right. Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually have 5 parts to this. I apologise that it's going to be quite lengthy, so I appreciate some latitude if you could grant me that. The first part is about in regards to the wage subsidy. I'm hoping that this is the first time that we've actually had a financial report, if I recall, where it's accommodated the repayment of the wage subsidy. I would like to seek some commentary from officers as to what lessons council officers would take from this situation in terms of how to proceed in similar circumstances in the future. The next question is in regards to page 141 of the PDF with regards to property management. Is it possible for officers to provide in the commentary effectively some sort of language that talks about what the cost of repairs and maintenance on items, assets that we are sweating out compared to what we projected was the depreciation and replacement of those items? Because I think that would help me, and I think it would help the ratepayers to understand what the consequences of sweating out an asset might mean. The third question.
Sorry, these questions by question. I think it's unfair for them to. So let's take the first question first, shall we? The wage subsidy. I'm not sure whether that's a question that should be answered by you, Graham, but can I let you answer that, Joe, or even Andrew? You go, Joe.
Through the Chair. Lessons learned from the wage subsidy was a very uncertain time. It is that bit about the technical accounting issues versus the cash flow issues. I don't think there's an easy answer to say there's a set way we would do it, but it's actually the lesson. I think the big lesson from the wage subsidy is the intent versus accounting treatment versus cash flow.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I take my hat off to council officers for what the work they did in that area, and the fact that we're in this position now is so what? Yeah. Sorry, I'm not opening it up to questions. This is a question from Councillor Hayward. It's been answered, even though I commented. The second question is about property management. Did we get that? Yes, Joe.
So the Chair, one of the pieces of work we're looking at is as part of the long-term plan, we've identified all the assets. We are now looking at the asset condition, and the next step will be and we do have an issue with the transparency of sweating the assets. What we're looking through is the asset condition, the investment, and the future planning. What we have locked in for the long-term plan, we've got very clear expenditure over the first year, which is essentials. Essential will then, in the first beginning of next year, be looking at the level of service associated with individual property assets, and that will then give us a better view on when we're sweating the assets or not. Currently, we don't have a clear picture on that one.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. So your third question, Councillor Hayward?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The third one is related to on page 148 around noise control. And I'm not clear from the language in the report. Can I just get an understanding that council officers are addressing what appears to be a level of service issue with our contractor Recon around responding to noise complaints?
Is there an officer around that can... Oh, sorry. James, you'll have to come up and use the microphone.
Good morning. Through the chair, yes, we are addressing that. It's about 20 to 15% of calls that aren't being attended within the hour under our KPIs. The reason for that is our external contractor Recon are often at different jobs. They could be in the Naronga Valley or whatever, and they get stuck in traffic, and there's a variety of things. So we met with them this week. Over the summer period, we tend to get more noise complaints, obviously due to parties and things and doors open and that sort of thing because it's hot. And we've asked them to have a permanently based vehicle here in Porirua while we're just over that summer period. And we're hoping that the less time that they take to get to the call-outs will balance off with the extra cost that we'll wear for having an extra car based here, but it should address those concerns.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's number 3. Number 4?
Number 4. As in regards to page 151, there is a reference to the Mitchell Stream, and in particular that there are some erosion issues at the bottom end of Mitchell Stream, which I assume is the section between Kinepuru Drive and Porirua Stream. My question is as follows. Is Council satisfied with the management measures it has in place to prevent further erosion on that section?
Through the chair, I'll just get back to the councillor. And tell all councillors when I've investigated it, but I haven't got someone from Parks here to answer that question for you.
Right.
Fifth and final.
Yep.
And this is in relation to page 158, the, I forgot what it's called, the project that with Datacom, if I understand it correctly. There is a large number of red dots there. And I recall when I was first elected to council, we had a briefing. This was a project that was in train. This feels to me as if there is a budget blowout in regards to the implementation of this project. I'm sure that you'll disabuse me of that notion in your response, but is there going to be any work done by council officers in relation to reviewing how this has got to this point?
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. It was unfortunate that you weren't at the meeting last week where Jo gave us an update on this project, and I was going to ask her to give us an update this time around, and I think that'll answer your questions. Right.
So this is a project that is under tight governance. Yes, we are behind on the timeframes. It's the complexity of the ERP system. We're in a partnership with Datacom, and it's a strategic partnership as they develop the product. Budget is not the key. There is some budget issues, but not significant, is in that Datacom are actually developing the product, and they have recently, for costs that we've incurred, reimbursed us. But we are going to an out-of-the-box solution, which is a strategic partnership with Datacom that are actually developing the product as we go through it. There is quite significant risk. The risk is but we are countering that by from Datacom's perspective. It is monitored by the board monthly because they see that local government is a new business to grow their local government business in a getting into cloud solution. We are reporting quarterly to the Audit and Risk Committee, and on the basis of if there's any delay to the project, we will immediately contact the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee, and we report to monthly to it on ELT, and the steering committee, which I chair, meets fortnightly on this. So if there are issues, we will bring it through the monthly reporting.
Thank you. You got a follow-up to that, Jeff?
No, thank you for your patience.
Right. Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, look, page 149, the Kinepuru area program. Was it just me, or the adventure park back on and starting work next month? That was a hell of a surprise to me. Can you clarify that? Are they actually? Is that a goer?
I can't, but there may be somebody that can. Yes, Stephen, you'll be able to do that. You've got a microphone, so that's good.
I have. Good morning, councillors. The Adventure Park program obviously greatly affected by the COVID, the lockdown, and the restriction on international travel. Their business case did rely heavily on international tourism as part of their financials in their business case. However, they are looking at a staged approach and are going to put a proposal to council soon, which will come up in the new year, where they do a staged development. And stage one, they are proposing it become a regional destination as opposed to an international visitor, relying on international visitors. And that will be essentially what they're talking about is everything but the gondola. So still having a regional destination as a mountain bike park with some services for that mountain bike park. But you should see something in the early new year when you're back on board.
All right. Do we have any other questions from councillors? I have a question about on 159 on the link roads. What is the consent issue with GWRC? Is it a difference of opinion is put in there, or is it something more substantial or substantive?
Off the top of my head, you're talking about with Greater Wellington Regional Council's monitoring, they've hardened up their approach. Not that they've had officers there all the way through, but they're digging in their toes. So there's a difference in opinion, and with delays, you can have arguments such as, well, grass would have struck if we weren't delayed through COVID, and it's not our fault as a contractor, it's the principal has to bear the cost. So there's all sorts of arguments like that, but generally speaking, you're seeing a much more vigorous regulatory approach taking place, and there'll be a defence to that too. So, and it's creeping onto our Link Roads project as well. So it affects us in that sense.
Okay, thank you. The comment I would make about that is it's all very well for Greater Wellington Regional Council to be particular about these issues now. It's a pity they weren't back in 2016 when the project first started and we had the big floods, etc., and were overwhelmed. But, that being said, that's the past, and hopefully they'll be better in the future. So, are there any other questions on the finance report? No? In that case, I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Carried. So that moves us to item 6.6, Making It Happen Organisational Grants Round. I'm moving it to put it on the table. Do I have a seconder? No? I'll take Councillor Ford. Sorry. Okay. Wait. You're off the gun. So I'm going to take this as read, although maybe just a little background, Maya, in terms of what this is all about, just to bring us up to speed again.
Thank you, Chair.
Briefly.
Yes. This is part of a standard funding round that we have. So it's been budgeted through the long-term plan 2018. The only thing that I have asked for in this paper, just out of transparency, is moving, reallocating some budget that we usually allocate to individuals through this fund to organisations, purely because we had such a great response. So I have just put that in there for transparency rather than asking for more funds.
Okay. So are there any questions from councillors? Oh, sorry, yeah, Councillor Morrell.
Just a point of clarification or a procedural. And if my memory serves me correctly, in previous councils, this sort of paper would be in non-public for council for committee to approve and then go to full council. I don't feel comfortable about debating this. I'm happy to concur with the paper. There are some items there that I'd like to debate, but I'm not going to do that in public. So I just thought that in the previous, these used to go to non-public and then came out of non-public into council.
Yes, certainly, councillor.
We got rid of the extra committees and we're just running the one committee. We decided that we need to be fair and transparent for everybody, so it should come through here rather than just a small group of councillors.
No, except that it comes through here, but in non-public. It comes to this in non-public to be debated, and then it's part of this committee, but it's in non-public.
We can have a discussion later, but I'm not sure I agree.
Yeah, and to be fair, it's not as if these grants are made by the wave of a hand. There are specific criteria, and we take it that those criteria have been met, and that's how you sort out those that get the grant and those that don't. So, but we can have the discussion afterwards. So are there any other questions, comments from councillors? Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, I just had one concern. I think it's a great paper and all worthy recipients. The one that worried me was Challenge 2000, doing a 5-day trip, 3 days of which would be canoeing down the Wanganui River. Now, there's been some horror stories of canoeing problems before, and I wonder about the expertise of the people who will be taking this. Are they water safety trained? And are we in any way responsible as sponsors if anything happens?
Through you, Chair. That's a great point. As far as I understand from the social workers that are running the projects, that they would, of course, have trained people that would take the kids down the river, but I can certainly clarify that with them before we go ahead.
Yeah, because it's a very good point, Mike, under health and safety regulations as to, us as a sponsor, whether it does make us responsible in any way, shape or form. Okay, and remembering that for the future as well. All right, that being said, and with that point of clarification, Councillor Duncan, I'm now going to put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Carried. That brings us to the last item on the agenda, which is minutes from external committees. I'm going to move it to put it on the table. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Morell, thank you very much. I'm going to take this as read. Does anybody have any questions that they might want to raise for those people that are representing us on these committees? If you're ready for it. That being the case, no. It's pretty clear when you read the minutes. So I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Carried. That brings us to the end of the meeting. It is now 9:41 and I declare the meeting closed. Thank you, everybody.